Let's please welcome to the stage CEO of LA Care, John Bacchus. John?
Thank you very much. It's truly a pleasure to be here. As DJ just mentioned, I'm a rather recent resident of California, and I'm registered to vote, and I have, I pay taxes, so I'm all set here. I'm one of you now. But it's been a remarkable adventure for me to bring my perspective and experience from having been in managed care now almost 40 years to California, and a quite different environment than ones I've been used to, but nonetheless, we are having a lot of fun. So what DJ asked me to do was talk about how we have coped with the massive growth in Medi-Cal enrollment, and I'd be happy to talk about that. As many of you are well aware, LA Care serves only Los Angeles County, and I was very amazed to learn that the population of Los Angeles County is bigger than 43 states, that if we were an economy on our own, we'd be the 19th largest in the world. The state is the 8th largest. And I've also discovered that it's so big it takes hours to drive from, let's say, Long Beach to Lancaster, and that's in the middle of the night. During the day, it's days to get there, but it's a big place. I get that. So LA Care, I think it's important that we understand how LA Care was organized and the conditions under which we operate, because it is unlike most other health plans. We're a public entity, we're a non-profit corporation, and we were born in the 1990s when California was moving Medi-Cal into managed care, and there was a concern that commercial plans might be too fickle and would come in and out based on rate changes. So the state legislature granted the counties the ability to form local initiatives, and Los Angeles County elected to form what's known as the two-plan model, which meant there would be one health plan that was a local initiative, which is LA Care, and then a commercial plan would be contracted, so there'd be some competition. And as that turned out, LA Care and HealthNet were the two plans chosen. But to make sure we had a lot of buy-in, we also developed relationships with plan partners. And in the beginning for LA Care, that's all we used were plan partners. But today, we still have 3 plan partners. But over the years, about 10 years ago, we began contracting directly with medical groups on our own. So HealthNet has Molina as a plan partner. LA Care has Anthem, Care First, and Kaiser as partners. And in our directly contracted network of medical groups, we have 28 delegated entities, IPAs and so forth, that we contract with. Anthem and Care First contract with an additional 28 IPAs that we don't contract with. So we're giving our members access to a lot of options. And if you throw in Kaiser as a closed system as an option, voila, we have 57 choices for members when they join the plan and where they receive their care, which makes the operation of an organization like LA Care extremely complicated, because we have to have contractual relationships with the groups, we have to have contractual relationships with the plan partners, who in turn have contractual obligations with the medical groups. So there's a lot of delegation and descending delegation in the organization. So any change, such as the expansion of Medi-Cal under the Affordable Care Act, presents enormous challenges for an organization like LA Care. Now, this slide will show you the growth. In the first column, you can see that California, prior to the implementation of the Affordable Care Act, had about a little under 8 million people in Medi-Cal. With the expansion afforded under the Affordable Care Act that California took advantage of, raising the income limit from 100 to 130%, 38% of the federal poverty level, today we have 13.6 million people in the state who rely on Medi-Cal for the vehicle by which they will receive their health care. That's 1/3 of the population of the state, an unmatched number anywhere else in the country. For Los Angeles County, it grew from 2.25 million to 3.8 million. So 38% of our residents are using Medi-Cal as their distribution. Now, in LA Care, as one of the two options, we grew from about 1.1 million to almost 2 million on Medi-Cal in 3 years. That's a stunning amount of growth, and that kind of growth also demands change and dictates that we make changes on how we operate and do the business. This next slide shows you how we've distributed that enrollment in terms of its categorization. Prior to the Affordable Care Act, Medicaid managed care plan, Medi-Cal managed care plans like LA Care took care of the moms and the kids, the TANF population. After the Affordable Care Act, the variety and complexity of the number of people we're responsible for has greatly changed. So today we still have over 1 million folks that qualify under TANF, moms and kids. The Medi-Cal expansion, merely raising the FPL income limit to 138%, gave us another 568,000 members. Now, for those of you that were here during that time, you know that the state of California decided, while we're implementing the Affordable Care Act, let's take all the people, the SPDs, seniors and persons with disabilities, and let's move them into managed care too. So we've also picked up 161,000 of those people, and we've also picked up 166,000 folks who rely on Medi-Cal just for home care and long-term care because they are most likely dual eligibles and get their Medicare coverage elsewhere. We also agreed to participate in the demonstration of managed care for dual eligibles, those that qualify for both Medi-Cal and Medicaid, and we have about a little under 13,000 of those folks. And we also decided that as a public entity participating in Medi-Cal, we should also participate in the California exchange, so that people who might migrate out of Medi-Cal because their income goes up would be able to have continuity of coverage by sticking with LA Care because we would be available in the exchange. And likewise, if they joined through the exchange and circumstances changed and they fell into eligibility for Medi-Cal, they could stay with us and have continuity of coverage through their insurer and whatever providers they were participating with. In addition to all this, in the last few years, we took on the responsibility for taking care of the unionized home health workers in the PASC program. So these are the IHSS workers. We have 47,000 of those folks in the plan. And we have a little residual left of healthy kids, which will end this year. So totally, we're taking care of about 2 million folks, which is every fifth person in LA County relies on LA Care. That's a big responsibility. We share that responsibility with our provider network. And as I mentioned, we have 3 plan partners. They take care of a little under 1 million, or about 48% of our total enrollment, and you can see the distribution across the 3 plan partners. Of our 28 delegated entities, one is the County Department of Health Services. This is a critical part of our network because the county maintains 24 outpatient clinics scattered around the county, but pivotally located in the communities where Medi-Cal beneficiaries live. So these are highly utilized entities, and as you know, the county also runs 4 hospitals. We also have contracts with all the federally qualified health centers here in Los Angeles County. And again, you have more than anywhere, or we have more than anywhere. There are 58 entities covering about 80 different locations. And again, these are critically located in the communities where vulnerable and Medi-Cal populations live. Then we contract with 26 medical organizations. I labeled them up here IPAs, although lots of labels seem to float around. And in that cohort, there's a little difference there that is very important in that in the LA County Department of Health Services and the FQHCs, the providers we access there are unique to those organizations. You could not see them if you didn't have, as a Medi-Cal member through LA Care, if we didn't have contracts with them. Among the 26 IPAs and the IPAs used by our plan partners, the doctors participate in multiple organizations. So we have doctors in as many as 7 different IPAs. And while that, you say, yeah, well, I guess, is that good or bad? Well, it's good in one sense, but on the other hand, it also begins to represent a duplication of administrative services that I'll talk to you about a little bit further into it. But if a doctor is participating in 7 IPA organizations, that means we're paying an administrative overhead fee to each of those 7 organizations for the same doctor. And it doesn't necessarily bring us any added value. So it's a questionable arrangement that we're going to be looking at in the future. And you'll notice I have a little thing there that says LA Care Directly Contracted Partners, Antelope Valley. Even though we have thousands of doctors through all these contractual arrangements, we still have access issues, particularly with almost a doubling in size of our enrollment over the last 3 or 4 years. We don't have enough providers, and we do have access issues. So we began up in the Antelope Valley, where we have 100,000 lives out of 300,000 folks, and that's where we had our most difficult need on access. So we began to contract directly with doctors in the community who were not otherwise available to us through our plan partners or IPAs, and we brought them on in January. Now, we only have a few hundred people in this program, but we're working out to make sure we know how to operate it smoothly, and we are ready to do more aggressive growth in that as a result of another development I'll share with you momentarily. Now, one would think, well, my gosh, with the expansion of the Affordable Care Act and you're getting into the exchange, is there anybody left that isn't covered? And unfortunately, there are. We estimate, UCLA Center for Health Policy a couple of years ago estimated that there was still 250,000 Medi-Cal eligible folks in the county who had not enrolled in Medi-Cal yet or picked a plan. We also know that with the California exchange, there are loads of people who are eligible for that who have not opted in yet. And every year, Covered California mounts a vigorous campaign to get the word out, to get people to pick a plan and avoid the tax penalty that goes with it. And then we have My Health LA, which is a program the county started to address the needs, particularly of undocumented immigrants, and they take care of 145,000 folks at those 24 DHS clinics, with the county essentially paying the bill for that. And then we have over 500,000 more additional folks, again, who are probably most likely undocumented folks. So we have over 1 million people in the county who we estimate are still not covered. So when we talk about the safety net, and I want to go back to the slide, the county DHS system and the FQHCs are the backbone of our safety net because they will see the people who are uninsured. They continue to fulfill that mission today. It's a much smaller component of their total patient volume than it was before the Affordable Care Act, but it's still there. So it's very important that we make sure those entities are vibrant and able to welcome those folks into their practices. Otherwise, where would they go? So all of this growth, and this is what DJ and I talked about, were the growing pains that presented for LA Care. First of all, the complexity of the populations we're serving is entirely different. With moms and kids, the emphasis is on prevention, early childhood development, maternal well care. Of course, you have NICU babies once in a while, and of course, the moms can develop complicated and serious conditions. But by bringing in SPDs, by bringing in duals, by bringing in people who are in the MLTSS program, we've brought in people who walk in with multiple chronic conditions and high utilizers. That's reflected in the growth in the revenue that's attached to them because it's risk-based. And our revenue while our population has doubled, our revenue has more than tripled. And that's not a great thing. It means that we're taking in higher risk folks. So as a health plan, that's meant we need to focus on developing models of care that will serve these new populations that we're responsible for that we didn't have when things got started. internally in our organizational structure, when you're moving to this sort of divergence and this sort of complexity in the population, we needed to restructure our organization so we could properly take responsibility for taking care of this enormous number of new people. And we needed to develop internal audit functions, enterprise risk assessment, single source for data management and analysis, because data is becoming more critical every day in how we operate our business and how our providers engage with their members. Accountability was unclear as a result of this. With all these new populations, who was responsible for them? How did we look after each of these components to make sure they were doing well? And for our contracted entities, plan partners, and the medical groups, we now had to begin to measure more effectively the quality of care being delivered. Because if the group's only relationship with us prior to the Affordable Care Act was taking care of a TANF population, did they have the right providers to address SPDs, duals with multiple chronic conditions? So we've had to expand the network, but it also is requiring us to begin to do more oversight of the medical groups that we're relying on to deliver quality, accessible care to our members. So we developed a strategic vision, which we launched last year, and it had, I'd say, 4 major components. First, we developed a matrix structure for the organization of LA Care internally, which I'll share with you in a moment. We developed an operating plan that said, look, we're dealing with a more complicated group of folks now, so we had 4 attributes that we wanted to reflect LA Care going forward: accountability, risk following the member to the provider in terms of revenue, unique models of care for each population segment, and fourth, reinvestment in the safety net in the community so the vulnerable folks that didn't have insurance would continue to have access to care, and we would help advance the care and health status of the entire county. And that came with 16 initiatives, one of which is the next bullet, which was to install a new operating system. We had been operating on a platform that had been there since the company began in 1997, and it was time to update it and bring it into the 21st century. We were able to turn on that new system on August 15th this year, and I said, well, for us, the 21st century began on August 15th because we can now process claims more effectively and efficiently. We can do data collection, data management, and we have care management protocols that are available to all of our providers. And then finally, we began to examine the measuring of performance by the development of report cards for the IPAs that work with us, and I will share with you a little more detail on that. First, not to bore you with an organization chart of LA Care, but I think it's important to understand that for an organization like us to take care of 2 million people across a variety of categories, we needed to mirror that in our organizational structure. So we created 5 executive director positions, and each of one of them sits on top of some segment of our enrolled population that have common characteristics, and we are dealing with them as basically 5 products. So the executive directors have P&L responsibility for how that segment works. They also are responsible for making sure we meet the contractual obligations that are unique to each of those segments and deliver them. So they're now the drivers in the organization. All the C-level folks that used to report in a more hierarchical manner to the CEO are now the enablers. That doesn't mean they're less important than the drivers, because the drivers need the enablers. So if you look at someone like our chief operating officer, that person needs to be able to deliver operations that support each of these different populations, and there are little nuances and differences. So the result of doing this is that we've developed service level agreements internally between each of our functional areas and each of the ED product segments. And it probably in 90% of the service level agreement is common to all 5 products, but when there is something unique that has to be done for one of them, it's called out in the service level agreements. We now know who's accountable, we now know who has authority, and we now know who to communicate to. When we first developed this and I shared it with our leadership team, one of our more veteran leaders said, well, at least now I know who to talk to before I had to talk to everybody. So we viewed this as a step forward for us. I think I can move on from that. So these are the 4, you can't read this and I'm going to slip by this real fast, but those are the 4 attributes, and underneath it is a listing of the operating plan and the initiatives we've had to put in place to make sure that we can make those attributes real. And the operating plan is a living, breathing, functioning thing, and as we check off initiatives that are done, we bring up others that are necessary to further the development of that particular attribute. Now, one of those is the IPA Scorecard that I mentioned before. This is a very important initiative for us for a couple of reasons. Number one, we need to say to people who are picking LA Care for their insurer that you're going to get access to quality care. We can't say, well, it depends on who you pick. We have to say it's uniform across whoever you pick. So to accomplish that, we developed the scorecard. The second development is that Medi-Cal and all Medicaid plans around the United States, following CMS Medicaid managed care rules, the mega rule that came out earlier this year, are going to move to value-based contracting, which means that we will have a contract with California to serve Medi-Cal patients, but our reimbursement will depend on the quality that we can demonstrate is being delivered. And that's being delivered through our delegated entities and our IPAs. So we felt for them to know where to direct their resources, we needed to develop a tool that we could give them feedback that would help them decide where to direct their resources for the biggest improvement. So we have developed what we call the Value Initiative for IPAs, and we should call it that instead of a scorecard. But it has 5 domains, and the domains we selected are the ones that we, at this point, assume that California or any other state would use in their value-based contracting, that we would have to demonstrate we're doing well. So first is access and availability. It's very important. California has very defined rules on access and availability, the distance by time and travel between the beneficiary and where they're going to get their services. Also, do we have a complete complement of specialists in the network and so forth. HEDIS, if you've been in healthcare, you know what HEDIS is. It's a very important tool that's used to measure quality. Now, I've had plenty of places I've gone where someone will say, well, you know, those HEDIS measures aren't worth anything, and they really are measuring the wrong things. I agree. But for us to create our own and ignore these will come back to bite all of us, because these are the established measurements that are out in the industry now, and we're going to pursue improving our scores on those. At the same time, we're going to have a political agenda to work with CMS and other regulators to say, you know, we've got to update the measures to be more effective of real quality as opposed to some box checking that goes on. So we gave access and availability and HEDIS each 25% of the score, because we think those will be the 2 most important things in value-based contracting that we be able to show. You can get to see somebody, they're available, and the quality scores are high. The third was member satisfaction, which we gave a 20% rating. Utilization, we included because we think there are a few key indicators that we can universally point to, risk-adjusted, to tell us whether a provider is looking at how they're using the resources without diminishing quality to deliver value for the dollars they get. And the fifth one is encounter timeliness. Now you're going, what the hell is that? Well, when you deal with a medical group or a plan partner who you are essentially paying a capitation to, you're reliant on that organization to tell you what they did with the money. Hey, we gave you $100 a month for 1,000 people. What did you do with it? And they need encounter back data to say, well, we provided this many visits under these different codes, and here it is, which we in turn have to report back to the state. If we were running a fee-for-service model where the providers had to submit a claim to get paid, this would not be an issue because the claim is the foundation of the encounter material. So we have had a history of some kinds of slow delivery of the encounter data. So we're giving 15% of the score to whether or not the organization we're contracting with can provide us the encounter data within 60 days of the date of service. So we've rolled this report card out. Now this is blinded, but it looks somewhat like this. So there's a domain score multiplied times the weight, which gives us a final score. And the domain score is done through an attainment scoring methodology, which CMS and others use, which basically compares you to the others in the same group. So you're compared to the other 27 entities that we're contracting with, and you get a score based on where you are in relation to the 50th percentile. So in year one, you may be above the 50th percentile and you're getting points. If everyone rises their scores the following year and your score didn't move, you may now be below the 50th percentile. So the idea is to use kind of peer pressure to keep rising the level of performance in the organization. So we have issued these for 2014. We are about to issue them for 2015. And we've informed our groups that 2015 will be the base year, because they couldn't do anything about 14 or 15 in terms of us providing the data to react to, but they've had plenty of warning. So we will take 15 as the base year and measure performance against 2016 going forward. But there are 4 elements in access and availability, 16 in HEDIS, about 20 in the member satisfaction, 5 in utilization, and just 1 in encounter timeliness. And what we show them is where their score is, what the 50th percentile score was for everybody, what the 95th was. And what we say is if you look at the gap between your score and the 50th, if you're below, and you're real close, maybe that's a place you should focus some resources to move the needle for next year. Because when we go to value-based contracting, we will have to move these up forward if we want to get the highest level of reimbursement value-based contracting will offer. Because for the population we're serving, if we leave a penny on the table, shame on us. We need to make sure we get all the resources that our beneficiaries are entitled to under that sort of arrangement. So we view the scorecard not as a consumer enterprise, but we view it as a tool to help our providers know where to direct resources and where to show them where there are opportunities for improvement. We still have gaps in terms of the number of providers that are available to us. And as you saw on the map, and you know, it's a big county. So there are areas where we don't have enough providers, and one of those was the Antelope Valley. So we are beginning to sign contracts directly between LA Care and individual physician practices, or a group of pediatricians or so forth. And we're doing that to provide more access to our folks, and we will continue to do that. And we're looking right now at other geographic holes. We've done the geo-mapping, and it's very interesting. Here's where our members are, overlay where the providers are, and they're distinct holes, so it looks like a piece of Swiss cheese. We're filling in the cheese. And it will be important for us as the health plan to take on the responsibility of providing all the services that go with that. So in the not too distant future, we'll look like this. We'll have our plan partners, we'll have DHS, we'll have the community clinics, we'll have the IPAs, and we'll have a direct contract with providers that will continue to grow. We've also been able to do some innovation along the same time. I won't go over all of these, but I'll mention a couple that I think are very important. Number one, we do complex care management for those folks that an IPA can't handle, or we have an algorithm that says this patient needs extra attention. And we take care of those folks through our own care management department. However, our care managers are a couple of blocks away in a 33-story building. We're going to move our care managers out into the community. We have family resource centers scattered around the county. We've got 4 of them in Inglewood, Linwood, Pacoima, and Boyle Heights, and we're opening 3 more next year, 1 in Palmdale and 1 in East Los Angeles and 1 in another site. And these basically are health education centers open to the public. You do not have to be an LA Care member, and about half the people that come are not our members. That's part of our way of investing back in the community and trying to elevate the status of the population as a whole. We're going to move the care teams out there. The idea is we want the care teams to be closer to the members, to actually be able to go into their homes or have them come into the center. We think high-touch care management is much more effective than telephonic care management. I also want to mention that we have a community health investment fund. It's about $10 million this year, and those are grants we give out to allot to the safety net providers to help them cope with emerging technologies, improvements in their practice, because it's important, as I said earlier, that we keep the providers in the safety net nearer to the members, as near to the members as possible. And finally, I just want to say that we have issues that we still need to address as the community. Access is one, education is another. As we've brought in over 500,000 people that are new to managed care and the people we've brought in for the California exchange, we know that these people, just because you give them a plastic card doesn't mean they know what to do with it. So we've now realized we have to go back and do more orientation and are developing better onboarding programs for our new members so they know how to use the benefits they're entitled to and do not continue to rely on the emergency room as their primary care practice. We know there are holes in the safety net. Poverty, homelessness, nutrition, immigration status are still issues that have to be dealt with. And finally, comprehensive Medi-Cal funding. My concern is that now that the Affordable Care Act is going into its 4th big year of implementation, a lot of the money that was available during the first 3 years is gone. So a state like California, which has expanded its responsibility to 1/3 of the state, really needs a more comprehensive way of predicting the financing they're going to use to support it. We cannot wait for the budget every year and have a budget crisis and the budget passed in the last day and then find out that we've got to cut, because we have to respond very quickly. We need a more long-term approach, and that's something we're trying to engage the state in a conversation on, and who knows where it'll go. But I want to leave you with one thing. It's great that we serve 2 million people, but my fondest dream is that someday we could say, well, our enrollment dropped this year to 1.9 million because more people moved out of poverty. I mean, look, in Los Angeles County, the disparity between those folks that are living in poverty and the rest of us is, to me, alarming. And coming from the Northeast, where some of your homeless population, oh, you notice there are not so many in the winter. Well, out here, they're visible all year round. So I think a program like LA Care, working with our plan partners, working with our contracted entities, and working with the legislature has to, in addition to making sure we provide good care, what can we do in our small way to help move people out of poverty so Medi-Cal is a smaller program in the state and not a bigger program in the state. And finally, I want to leave you with a quote I have hanging over my desk. And I've had this for years, and you're saying, oh, he's patting himself on the back because he's one of those progressive spirits. No, I hang this on my wall to remind myself not to be one of the 1,000 men appointed to guard the past. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John. Let me make sure this is turned on. There's a little switch there. It's not on yet. And I'm going to grab this.
Okay.
Go ahead and sit down either side there. And Mike, why don't you bring the slide deck back up for me for a second? I think this notion of working with providers on their quality is something people talk about. Doesn't often happen. Plans, generally speaking, in my view, have a lot of the data, maybe all of the data that's really necessary to move the system forward. Seldom do they actually share it, candidly. So I think it's really, for lack of a more erudite term, I think it's pretty cool that you're doing that. I want to ask you about this, though. This is the 2013-14 data. Mm-hmm. And when I look at that, and I'll just, again, be candid, just you and me, a glass of wine, and we're all by ourselves, just us chickens. I see the access score is great. I see HEDIS, utilization member satisfaction, as pretty poor. I mean, I don't have anything to go on other than 2 out of 10 seems like a low number. Mm-hmm. And out of the bottom line there, this is your 4th best provider group. Collectively speaking, that would mean that the providers and the LA Care Health Plan either ain't so great on quality, or maybe the numbers are skewed and you have really high aspirations and you're just average now and trying to get to perfect. How should we take that data and interpret it?
Well, you should take it in 2 ways. Number one, the HEDIS data is very dependent on the encounter submissions, and apparently encounter submissions have been a problem at LA Care long before I got here, and probably a problem for HealthNet as well. So part of that score, when an IPA looks at it and goes, well, we're doing better than that, and we say, well, we went on the data we had. So send in the data. Because contractually they're obligated to provide the encounter data, but we know there are holes in it. So this is a way to illustrate for them how important it is.
Yeah.
Secondly, unfortunately, this reflects a trend at LA Care, which was the most alarming thing to me when I got there and really had me started looking at this, which has led to the report cards, and that is that our accreditation from NCQA has been persistently mediocre and going in the wrong direction. Now, and this can be explained in a couple of ways. Our accreditation status as of 2010 was excellent, the highest you could be, with 91 points. Today we're at accredited with 75 points, so we've lost 16 points in 6 years. Now, NCQA has raised the standards, number one. Number two, we've got a much different population today with that mix I showed you than we had in 2010. So part of it is we've got to make sure that we've got the correct providers in our network to address this population, which is another reason we're doing direct contracting. And we've also got to show the providers this is what the result is and this is what's happening. So it is a serious concern, and I haven't been shy about saying to our providers and to the public, our NCQA accreditation scores are mediocre, and we've got to reverse it.
Yeah. Can you tell the story? I know, I believe you said 27 provider groups plus direct contracting, but you had 28, right? Didn't you cancel one group?
No, we did cancel a group, but that was just an error on the slide. I count DHS as one of the groups, and the people putting together the slides didn't, so that's all that meant.
My question is about that experience of losing one provider group and what that meant for patients and for the community.
Well, aside from DHS and the FQHCs, among the other 26 groups, we did, prior to my arrival, cancel a group, but it took effect after I got there. And this just shows you the problem with the multiple representation of doctors in multiple groups. We had 6,500 members seeing a PCP in this group. 6,000 of them had a PCP that participated in one of our other groups. So that when we canceled them, they never knew anything happened. And we had to reach out to 500 people and tell them their PCP was no longer in the network and they had the option of changing PCPs or changing health plans. So if we wound up with a smaller universe of IPAs, it might not mean that we have any less providers.
Yeah. One of the folks, one of the topics, shifting gears a little bit, that we talked about before is Medicare. It's one of your columns on your matrix spreadsheet. I'm aware, and Bill Barcelona from CAPG's here somewhere, but I'm aware that there's legislation in DC that would allow Medicare to contract directly with provider groups. If that's successful in Medicare, that might be adopted in various states and for Medicaid. What are your thoughts on that model of direct contracting that's different than the direct contracting you're talking about?
Well, we're talking about directly contracting from the health plan to the provider without an intervening medical group. I believe the legislation you're referring to would, if passed, would allow the medical group to contract directly with CMS for Medicare beneficiaries. Our reaction to it is, if it's a level playing field, fine, but I believe the details of that legislation would exempt the medical group from meeting all of the insurance-like regulations that we're held accountable to. What would be of most concern to me was the financial reserve requirement that we have to carry on as a health plan, as well as meeting these quality standards. Because the things we threw up on the board on NCQA and CAPS, those are the stuff that DHCS comes and looks at us every year. And we're highly regulated. And to me, it's got to be a level playing field. We've all got to meet the same regulation standard.
Yeah. There's a lot of additional questions that I would love to ask you in order to sort of elevate some of your thought leadership on this. In talking with you privately, you're well down the path on a lot of these conversations. So thank you for the time that you gave us here today, and thank you for your ongoing engagement with us. So let's give him a round of applause.